diabetic started Ozempic. His brother had the same diagnosis and chose a different medication. Same disease, same doctor, same appointment. 2 years later, one was managing his blood sugar. The other had food sitting inside his stomach for days. At first, Daniel Carlson thought it was indigestion. Then he thought it was acid reflux. Then he thought he had picked up a stomach virus that refused to leave. But when he arrived at the emergency room, 26 months after his first Ozempic injection, doctors discovered something they almost never see. His stomach had nearly stopped emptying. A scan revealed food that should have left his body days earlier, still sitting inside him. Meals were piling up faster than his stomach could move them. And here is the part that will keep you up tonight. The medication that helped control his diabetes may have been the same thing slowing his stomach down. Because by the time Daniel learned what was happening, stopping the drug would not guarantee that his stomach would start working again. This is hidden pathogens.
This is hidden pathogens?
Daniel Carlson and Michael Carlson were born 11 minutes apart. Identical twins, 38 years old, both living in Phoenix, both working in IT, both carrying extra weight they had been trying to lose for years, and both had spent the last decade ignoring the same problem, type 2 diabetes. At first it was easy to dismiss. A little fatigue, a little thirst, a few bad blood test results. Then the numbers kept climbing. Their A1C rose year after year until their primary care physician finally delivered same warning to both brothers. If we don't get this under control, you're going to start damaging your eyes, your kidneys, your nerves, and your heart. The diagnosis became official 3 weeks later. Type 2 diabetes, same disease, same doctor, same city, same appointment. The brothers sat side by side as treatment options were explained. Diet changes, exercise, metformin, and a newer medication that had become one of the most talked about drugs in America, Ozempic. The doctor explained the benefits. Lower blood sugar, weight loss, reduced cardiovascular risk. For many patients, it worked remarkably well. Daniel liked the sound of that. He wanted the most effective option available. Michael was more cautious. He preferred to start with the older medications that doctors had been prescribing for decades. The doctor said either approach was reasonable. The choice was theirs. Daniel chose Ozempic. Michael chose a more traditional treatment plan. They left the office together, stopped for lunch together, joked about getting old together. Neither one thought they had just made a decision that would divide their lives into before and after. Remember that. Remember who chose what. Because only one of these brothers is going to finish this story with his stomach working normally. Daniel picked up his first Ozempic pen on a Thursday afternoon. The pharmacist showed him how to use it. Remove the cap, attach the needle, dial the dose, inject into the stomach, thigh, or upper arm. Simple. Daniel sat in his car in the pharmacy parking lot, staring at the pen for almost 10 minutes. Before finally doing it, he barely felt the needle. That was it. No dramatic reaction, no pain, no warning. Nothing happened, at least nothing he could see. The next morning he woke up feeling normal. The day after that, normal. The week after that, normal. If anything, he felt better. By the second week, he noticed he wasn't as hungry. The constant cravings that had followed him for years seemed quieter. He wasn't thinking about food every hour. Meals that used to leave him searching for seconds suddenly felt satisfying. For the first time in a long time, controlling his eating didn't feel like a fight. The weight started coming off. 5 pounds, then 10, then 15. Friends noticed. Coworkers asked what he was doing differently. His doctor was impressed. 3 months after starting Ozempic, Daniel's blood sugar numbers looked better than they had in years. 6 months later, his A1C had dropped dramatically. His energy improved. His clothes fit differently. His confidence came back. Every appointment felt like a success story. Meanwhile, Michael was still working through the slower approach. Diet changes, exercise, metformin. His numbers were improving, but not nearly as fast. Daniel couldn't help feeling like he had made the smarter choice. The brothers joked about it constantly. "You're living in the future," Michael said one afternoon. Daniel laughed. "Damn right I am." And honestly, it looked that way. The medication seemed almost miraculous. It was helping him lose weight, helping him control his diabetes, helping him feel healthier than he had in years. Why would he ever stop taking it? That question matters, because the most dangerous part of this story is not what happened when Daniel got sick. It's what happened before he got sick. For nearly 2 years, everything appeared to be working perfectly. The first symptom appeared so quietly that Daniel almost missed it. About 9 months after starting Ozempic, he went out for dinner with his wife. Halfway through the meal, he pushed his plate away, not because the food was bad, because he felt full, unusually full, the kind of full feeling you get after Thanksgiving dinner. The problem was that he had only eaten half a sandwich. His wife laughed. "Looks like the Ozempic is still doing its job." Daniel laughed too. That explanation made sense. The medication was supposed to reduce appetite. Feeling full was normal. At least that's what he thought. A few weeks later, another symptom appeared. Nausea. Nothing dramatic. Just a mild, queasy feeling that came and went. Some mornings he noticed it after breakfast. Other days it appeared after dinner. It was annoying, but hardly alarming. The drug information sheet had mentioned nausea as a common side effect. Daniel checked the box in his mind and moved on. Then came the bloating. His stomach felt tight after meals. Sometimes it felt as if the food just sat there. Hours after eating, he still felt stuffed, as though dinner had never left. But again, there was an explanation. Maybe he ate too fast. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe it was acid reflux. Maybe it was getting older. There was always a reason that sounded more likely than something being seriously wrong. Meanwhile, his diabetes remained under control. His blood sugar looked great. His weight continued to drop. Every objective measure said the treatment was working. So Daniel ignored the symptoms. Most people would have. The human brain is very good at dismissing small problems when everything else seems to be improving. Month after month, the fullness became more frequent. The nausea lasted longer. The bloating became harder to explain. Yet none of it felt like an emergency. Not yet, because Daniel could still work, still drive, still go out with friends, still live a normal life. What he didn't know was that something inside his body was beginning to slow down. Not suddenly, not all at once, but meal by meal, hour by hour. His stomach was gradually forgetting how to do the one thing it had done every day of his life: empty itself. And by the time Daniel realized that wasn't normal, the problem had been developing for far longer than anyone suspected. By the second year, the symptoms were impossible to ignore. Daniel would eat breakfast and still feel full at lunchtime. He would eat lunch and still feel full at dinner. Some nights he went to bed, feeling as though an entire day's worth of food was still sitting in his stomach. The nausea was getting worse. Not enough to make him vomit. Enough to make him dread meals. His wife finally convinced him to schedule an appointment. The doctor listened carefully. Fullness, bloating, nausea, no severe pain, no fever, no bleeding. The symptoms pointed toward a dozen common problems. The most obvious explanation was stress. Daniel worked long hours, deadlines, meetings, constant emails. The doctor suggested stress could be affecting his digestion. It happens all the time. Daniel accepted the explanation. For a while, it even made sense. Then the symptoms kept getting worse. A few months later, he returned. This time, the doctor suspected acid reflux. Heartburn can sometimes present in unusual ways. So can gastritis. Daniel was given medication and told to avoid certain foods, spicy meals, late-night snacks, coffee, alcohol. For several weeks, he followed every instruction. Nothing changed. The fullness remained. The nausea remained. The bloating remained. The next explanation was overeating. That one surprised Daniel. He was eating less than he had in years, but sometimes people underestimate portion sizes. Sometimes weight loss changes eating habits in unexpected ways. Sometimes digestion slows for reasons that are difficult to identify. The advice was simple: smaller water, more exercise. Daniel followed that advice too. Still nothing. What nobody realized was that the symptoms themselves were misleading, because each explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Stress causes stomach problems. Acid reflux causes stomach problems. Overeating causes stomach problems. Doctors see those conditions every day. What they almost never see is a stomach that is slowly stopping. And when common symptoms point toward common diagnoses, rare diagnoses often stay hidden. That is exactly what happened to Daniel. Appointment after appointment, medication after medication, explanation after explanation. The real problem remained invisible. Meanwhile, something strange was beginning to happen. Daniel noticed that when he burped, he could sometimes taste food from hours earlier. Not the flavor of a recent meal, the flavor of lunch after midnight, the flavor of dinner the next morning, as though the food had never left, as though it was still there. Because it was. And very soon, Daniel was about to discover just how long food had been sitting inside him. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning. Daniel had eaten dinner the night before. Grilled chicken, rice, a small salad, nothing unusual. He went to bed feeling uncomfortable but assumed it would pass. Around 3 a.m, he woke up nauseated. Not the mild nausea he had been living with for months. This was different. His stomach felt stretched, tight, painfully full. He sat on the edge of the bed waiting for the feeling to settle. Instead, it got worse. By sunrise, he was vomiting. At first, it seemed like a stomach bug. Then he looked into the toilet and realized something wasn't right. There were pieces of food he recognized. Food that should not have been there. Food he had eaten long before the previous night. Daniel stared at it, trying to remember, trying to place it. His wife found him standing in the bathroom, pale, sweating, confused. "What is it?" Daniel shook his head. "I think that's from days ago." She thought he was joking. He wasn't. Over the next several hours, the vomiting continued. Again and again. Meals that should have left his body long ago seemed to be coming back up. His wife drove him to the emergency room. By the time they arrived, Daniel was dehydrated and exhausted. The triage nurse asked the usual questions. Food poisoning? Recent illness? Travel? Alcohol? Daniel answered no to all of them. The doctors ordered blood work, fluids, medication for nausea. At first, they suspected a blockage. Something physically preventing food from moving through his digestive tract. A CT scan was ordered. Daniel expected the scan to show a tumor, or a twisted intestine, or some kind of obstruction. Instead, the images revealed something stranger. His stomach was massively distended, packed with partially digested food, yet there was no obvious blockage, no tumor, no mass, no mechanical reason for it to be happening. The emergency physician stared at the images, then called for a gastroenterologist, because the scan suggested a possibility that none of Daniel's previous doctors had considered. What if the problem wasn't that something was blocking his stomach? What if his stomach had simply stopped moving? For nearly 2 years, Daniel had been searching for an explanation. Stress, acid reflux, diet, overeating. Now, for the first time, someone was asking a different question. Not what was inside his stomach, but why it was still there. And the answer was about to change everything. The gastroenterologist reviewed Daniel's scans the next morning. The stomach was enlarged, packed with food, but there was still no obstruction, nothing physically blocking the exit. That detail mattered, because if food could not leave the stomach, there were only 2 possibilities. Something was blocking the pathway, or the stomach itself had stopped pushing. The doctor ordered an upper endoscopy first. A camera was passed through Daniel's mouth and into his stomach. The procedure was supposed to confirm that there was no hidden blockage. Instead, it revealed something unsettling. Food, a lot of it, food that should not have been there. Daniel had been fasting. He had not eaten since arriving at the hospital, yet material remained inside his stomach. The doctor documented everything, then ordered another test, a gastric emptying study. Most people have never heard of it. The test sounds simple. You eat a small meal containing a harmless radioactive tracer. Then doctors track how quickly the food leaves your stomach. In a healthy person, the stomach gradually empties over several hours. Food moves forward. Digestion continues. The process is so automatic that nobody ever thinks about it, unless it stops. Daniel ate the test meal. Then he waited. Hours later, the images came back. The technician reviewed them, then reviewed them again. Something was wrong. The food wasn't moving. Not normally. Not even close. The report showed severe delayed gastric emptying, far beyond what doctors would expect. The gastroenterologist walked into Daniel's room holding the results. Daniel immediately knew something was different. Doctors have a certain look when they finally find the answer. The doctor pulled up a chair. "We know what's happening now." Daniel's wife squeezed his hand. The doctor pointed to the images. "Your stomach isn't emptying properly." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the muscles and nerves that do food through your stomach are no longer working the way they should." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel asked the obvious question. "Is there a name for that?" The doctor nodded. "Yes." He paused. "Gastroparesis." Daniel had never heard the word before. Most people haven't. But over the next few months, he would learn everything about it. Because gastroparesis literally means stomach paralysis. Not complete paralysis, not always, but enough that food can remain trapped for hours, sometimes days. Instead of acting like a conveyor belt, the stomach becomes a storage container. Meals pile up, digestion slows, nausea worsens, vomiting becomes common. And in severe cases, people become malnourished because they can no longer process food normally. For nearly 2 years, Daniel had been looking for the wrong problem. The issue wasn't stress, it wasn't acid reflux, it wasn't overeating. The issue was that his stomach had been gradually losing its ability to do its job. Now they finally had a diagnosis. But another question remained, and it was the question Daniel feared most. Why had it happened? Because when the doctors reviewed his medical history, one detail kept appearing over and over again. The same medication, the same weekly injection, the same drug he had trusted for almost 2 years, Ozempic. To understand what happened to Daniel, you need to understand what a healthy stomach is supposed to do. Most people imagine digestion as a passive process. Food goes in, the body handles the rest. But that is not what actually happens. The stomach is a machine, a muscular organ constantly squeezing, grinding, and pushing food toward the small intestine. Every meal begins a carefully coordinated chain reaction. Nerves signal muscles, muscles contract, food is broken down. Then the stomach releases it little by little into the digestive tract. The process happens automatically. You never think about it until it stops. Gastroparesis literally means stomach paralysis. The word sounds dramatic. The reality is worse. Because paralysis does not always happen all at once. Sometimes the stomach slows gradually, a little slower, then slower still, until food that should leave in hours remains trapped for most of the day, then overnight, then longer. Imagine eating breakfast. Now imagine that breakfast is still sitting in your stomach at dinner. Imagine eating dinner, then waking up the next morning with that meal still inside you. That is what Daniel's body was doing. His stomach had stopped acting like a conveyor belt. It had become a storage container. Food entered, but it did not leave. The longer it remained there, the more problems it created. The stomach stretched, pressure built, bloating worsened, nausea became constant. Sometimes the trapped food hardened into masses called bezoars, large clumps that can block the digestive tract completely. Other times the food simply sat there, hour after hour, day after day, slowly decomposing, slowly fermenting, producing gas, producing discomfort, producing symptoms that many patients struggle to describe. One woman with severe gastroparesis compared it to carrying a Thanksgiving dinner inside her stomach every hour of every day. Daniel understood exactly what she meant. For months he had felt permanently full. Now he finally knew why. But there was another problem. The stomach does more than hold food. It controls when nutrients enter the bloodstream. When food stops moving normally, blood sugar becomes unpredictable. One day medication works too well. The next day it barely works at all. Meals arrive late. Digestion becomes chaotic. For a diabetic, that creates an entirely new set of dangers. And here is what made Daniel's case especially frightening. Doctors could explain what was happening. They could diagnose it. They could measure it. But they could not guarantee they could reverse it. Because once the nerves controlling the stomach stop functioning properly, recovery becomes uncertain. Some patients improve, some do not. Some spend the rest of their lives managing symptoms that never completely disappear. Daniel sat in his hospital room listening to all of this, trying to process a diagnosis he had never heard of 24 hours earlier. The answers were finally coming, but so were the questions, because one question still remained. If Ozempic helped millions of people manage diabetes safely, Why had Daniel's stomach stopped working? Before we continue, if you're fascinated by real medical mysteries like this, share this video and subscribe to this channel. And if you value these videos, there's a free link in the description and pinned comment that helps support the channel. Every bit of click helps us continue researching and telling these stories, and it's completely free. And wait till you hear this, might be even more scary. Daniel expected the diagnosis to be the hard part. It wasn't. The hard part came next. What do we do about it? The gastroenterologist took a breath before answering. Because unlike a blockage, gastroparesis cannot simply be removed. There is no surgery that reliably fixes it. No procedure that flips a switch and makes the stomach work normally again. The first step was obvious. Stop the Ozempic, immediately. No more injections, no more weekly doses, no more medication. Daniel felt relieved. If the drug was contributing to the problem, stopping it should solve it, right? Not necessarily. That was the problem. The doctor explained that once stomach motility becomes severely impaired, recovery is unpredictable. Some patients improve within weeks, some improve within months, some continue struggling for years, and some never fully recover at all. Nobody could tell Daniel which group he belonged to. The stomach's movement depends on an intricate network of nerves and muscles working together perfectly. When that system is disrupted, restoring it is not always simple. Doctors can treat symptoms, they can manage complications, but they cannot force nerves to heal on a schedule. Daniel stared at the floor. For the first time since entering the hospital, he felt genuinely afraid. Not because he was dying, because nobody could tell him whether he would ever be normal again. The treatment plan reflected that uncertainty. Small meals, very small meals, foods that were easier to digest, liquids whenever possible, medications designed to stimulate stomach contractions, anti-nausea drugs, frequent monitoring, and patience, a lot of patience. The doctors warned him that progress would likely be measured in months, not days. Meanwhile, life would become much more complicated. Some mornings Daniel felt hungry but could not eat. Other days he ate a few boot bites and felt completely full. Sometimes he vomited without warning. Sometimes he didn't. The symptoms seemed to follow rules that nobody fully understood. Even worse, his diabetes became harder to manage. Before gastroparesis, food entered his bloodstream on a predictable schedule. Now meals could sit in his stomach for hours before suddenly moving all at once. Blood sugar spikes became unpredictable. Lows became unpredictable. Everything became unpredictable. The medication that had once made diabetes easier to control had left him fighting a completely different battle. And then the doctor said something Daniel would never forget. Some patients recover. Daniel nodded. The doctor continued. Some don't. That was it. No guarantees, no timeline, no certainty. Just waiting. Waiting for nerves that might heal. Waiting for a stomach that might start working again. Waiting to find out whether the rest of his life would look like the last 2 years. Back in Phoenix, Michael watched all of this unfold from the front row. Same age, same diabetes, same doctor, same city. But while Daniel was learning how to live with a stomach that barely moved food, Michael was still eating dinner without thinking about it. And for the first time since their diagnosis, neither brother was joking about the different treatment choices they had made. The first thing Daniel lost was food. Not food itself, the experience of eating it. For most people, a meal is something they barely think about. You sit down, you eat, you move on with your day. For Daniel, every meal became a calculation. How much can I eat? How long will it stay down? Will I be sick afterward? Will I end up back in the hospital? A sandwich became a risk. A steak became impossible. Pizza disappeared from his life completely. The foods he once loved became the foods he feared most. His diet shrank until it barely resembled one. Soup, protein shakes, crackers, small portions spread throughout the day. Sometimes he could tolerate them. Sometimes he couldn't. There was no reliable pattern. The unpredictability was the worst part. One morning he could finish breakfast. The next morning the same meal made him nauseated after 2 bites. His stomach was making the decisions now, not him. The weight continued to fall. At first people congratulated him. "You look amazing. What are you doing? What's your secret?" Daniel learned to smile, then changed the subject, because explaining that your stomach no longer works normally tends to end conversations very quickly. The truth was far less glamorous. He wasn't losing weight because he wanted to. He was losing weight because eating had become difficult. Month after month, the number on the scale kept dropping. His clothes hung loosely from his frame. His face became thinner. His energy disappeared. Some days he felt exhausted before lunch. Other days he felt exhausted before getting out of bed. Then came the hospital visits. Dehydration, vomiting, nutritional deficiencies. Each episode started the same way. A meal that wouldn't move, hours of nausea, then vomiting, then weakness. Then another trip to the emergency room. The nurses started recognizing him. The doctors started recognizing him. Daniel hated that. Nobody wants to become a familiar face in an emergency department. Meanwhile, life kept moving around him. Friends went out for dinner. Cow workers met for lunch. Family gathered for holidays. Food sat at the center of every social event. And Daniel found himself avoiding more and more of them. Not because he didn't want to see people, because he was afraid of what would happen if he ate. Think about that for a moment. Imagine becoming afraid of something you have done every day since birth. Not heights, not flying, not public speaking, eating. The thing required to stay alive. That was what gastroparesis had turned food into. A source of anxiety, a source of uncertainty, a source of fear. One evening, Michael stopped by with takeout from their favorite restaurant. The same place they had been eating at for nearly 15 years. Daniel opened the container, looked at the food, then quietly closed it again. "I'm not hungry," he said. Michael knew he was lying. Daniel was hungry. His body desperately needed food. He was simply afraid of what would happen after he ate it. The brothers sat in silence for a while. Then Michael looked at him and asked the question neither of them had wanted to say out loud. "Do they know if you're going to get better?" Daniel stared at the untouched meal, and after a long pause, he gave the only answer the doctors had been able to give him. They don't know. For the first time since this began, the possibility started to feel real. What if this wasn't temporary? What if this wasn't a setback? What if this was the rest of his life? Michael still had diabetes. That never changed. He still checked his blood sugar, still watched what he ate, still went to the same doctor, still picked up prescriptions from the same pharmacy. His life was not perfect. Managing diabetes never is. But it was normal. He went to work, he went out to dinner, he traveled, he exercised. He ate when he was hungry and stopped when he was full. Most importantly, he never thought about his stomach, because healthy people never do. Daniel thought about his every hour of every day. The comparison became impossible to ignore. Same age, same genetics, same diagnosis, same doctor, same city. Two brothers who had started in almost exactly the same place. Now they were living completely different lives. One Saturday afternoon, Michael invited Daniel to a family barbecue. Their father was grilling burgers. Their mother had made potato salad. The backyard looked exactly like it had during 100 family gatherings before. For everyone else, it was normal. For Daniel, it felt like a reminder of everything he had lost. He sat with a bottle of water while everyone else ate. His father noticed. "You not hungry?" Daniel forced a smile. Not really. That answer had become automatic. Nobody challenged it. Nobody knew what to say. The smell of the food was almost worse than the sight of it. Because he remembered exactly what it felt like to eat without fear, to order a meal without calculating consequences, to finish dinner without wondering whether it would still be inside him tomorrow morning. Across the yard, Michael was eating a burger and talking with relatives, completely unaware of the process happening inside his body, the stomach contracting, the food moving, digestion occurring exactly as it should. Thousands of tiny functions working together so perfectly that he never had to think about them. Daniel watched him for a moment, then looked away. Later that evening, the brothers sat alone on the patio. The conversation drifted back to the day of their diagnosis, the same appointment, the same conversation, the same choices presented by the same doctor. Michael broke the silence. "I keep replaying it." Daniel knew exactly what he meant. So do I. If I'd picked Ozempic instead. He never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. Daniel understood. For a long moment, neither brother spoke. Then Daniel said something that Michael would remember for the rest of his life. "I don't know if it was the medication." Michael looked at him. Daniel continued. "I don't know if it caused this. I don't know if it contributed to it. I don't know if it was just bad luck." He paused. "But I know one thing." Michael waited. Daniel looked out into the dark backyard. "You and I started in the exact same place, and only one of us ended up here." Neither brother said anything after that, because there was nothing left to say. The hardest part wasn't the diagnosis. It wasn't the hospital visits. It wasn't the vomiting. It wasn't even uncertain to. It was knowing that two lives can begin almost identically and slowly separate because of a decision that seemed completely reasonable at the time. 2 years later, one brother still ate without thinking. The other planned every meal like it was a medical procedure, and neither of them knew whether that difference would ever disappear. For the next 8 months, Daniel waited. That was the treatment, not surgery, not a miracle drug, not a procedure. Waiting to see whether his stomach would remember how to work. The doctors monitored him closely. Follow-up appointments, repeat testing, medication adjustments, diet changes. Every few weeks there was another question. Any improvement, any less nausea, any fewer episodes of vomiting. Sometimes the answer was yes, sometimes it wasn't. Recovery came slowly, painfully slowly, the kind of slow that makes you doubt it is happening at all. 1 month, Daniel could tolerate a small sandwich. The next month, he could finish one. A few weeks later, he managed a restaurant meal for the first time since his diagnosis. The victories were so small that most people would never notice them. Daniel noticed every single one, because every bite felt like proof that his body had not completely given up. The hospital visits became less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. The vomiting episodes became less severe, then less common. The bloating remained, the fullness remained, but both slowly began to ease. A year after his diagnosis, Daniel underwent another gastric emptying study. He sat in the same department, ate the same test meal, waited for the same images. This time the results were different, not normal, but better. Food was moving again, slowly, imperfectly, but moving. The gastroenterologist smiled for the first time since this ordeal began. It wasn't a cure, it was progress, and progress was enough. Today, Daniel's stomach still isn't normal. Some foods remain off limits. Large meals are impossible. He still eats smaller portions than everyone around him. He still has days when nausea appears without warning, and he still carries medication everywhere he goes. But he no longer lives in fear of every meal. He no longer measures his life between emergency room visits. He no longer wonders whether dinner will still be inside him tomorrow morning. By medical standards, Daniel was fortunate. Many patients with severe gastroparesis never regain this much function. Some require feeding tubes. Some require repeated hospitalizations. Some spend years trapped in the cycle Daniel escaped. He knows that. That knowledge never leaves him. Neither does the memory. One evening, nearly 3 years after his first Ozempic injection, Michael invited him to dinner, the same restaurant they used to visit before any of this started. Daniel studied the menu, ordered carefully. A smaller meal than he once would have. The food arrived. Michael watched as his brother took the first bite. Neither of them said anything. A few minutes passed. Then 20, then 40. No nausea, no pain, no panic, just dinner. The kind of ordinary moment most people never think about. Daniel smiled, not because the food was exceptional, because for the first time in years, eating felt normal. And after everything he had lost, normal was enough. A diabetic started Ozempic. His brother sat in the same doctor's office and chose a different treatment. Same age, same diagnosis, same doctor, same city. One improved his blood sugar, the other stopped digesting food normally. 2 years later, doctors found meals still sitting inside his stomach. That was the outcome, but it wasn't the lesson, because gastroparesis is not unique to Ozempic. Diabetes itself can damage the nerves that control the stomach. Surgery can trigger it. Viral infections can trigger it. Sometimes, doctors never find a cause at all. The frightening part is not where it comes from. The frightening part is how quietly it begins. A little fullness, a little nausea, a little bloating. Symptoms so ordinary that almost everyone ignores them. Daniel ignored them. His doctors ignored them. And for nearly 2 years, the real problem kept getting worse, hidden behind explanations that sounded reasonable. Stress, acid reflux, overeating, until one morning his body finally forced everyone to pay attention. Most people think serious illness announces itself. It doesn't. Most of the time it whispers first. A symptom, a delay, a small change that seems too minor to matter. Then months later, sometimes years later, you realize the warning signs were there all along. Daniel was fortunate. His stomach partially recovered. Many patients are not so lucky. Some spend years fighting nausea. Some require feeding tubes. Some never regain the ability to eat normally again. That is why symptoms matter. Not because every symptom is dangerous, because sometimes the dangerous ones look ordinary at the beginning. Today, Daniel still thinks about the day he started treatment. Not with anger, not with regret, just perspective, because the decision felt completely reasonable at the time. Most medical decisions do. You make the best choice you can with the information you have, then life decides the rest. That was the only difference. That was the entire difference. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. These stories take a lot of research to put together. If you'd like to support the channel, you'll find a free link in the description and pinned comment. Checking it out helps support future videos, and every click allows us to keep bringing these cases to the channel. Also, it's completely free. And if you learned something from this case, share and subscribe for more real medical stories. And if you chose not to subscribe, leave a comment and tell me what would make these videos better. I read far more comments than you might think. This is Hidden Pathogens. I'll see you in the next video. Good night.
This is Hidden Pathogens?